I always believed that trust was the foundation of any marriage. And for 10 years, I trusted my wife, Rachel, with everything I had. She was beautiful, charming, and, at least in my eyes, the perfect partner. We had a home in the suburbs, good friends, and what I thought was an unbreakable bond. But looking back, I realize now that the signs were always there. I was just too blind to see them. I met Rachel in college. She had this magnetic energy that could pull anyone into her orbit. I fell hard and fast, and within 2 years, we were married. I worked hard, building a solid career in finance, while she worked in event planning, a job that often kept her out late, hosting high-profile clients and managing corporate gatherings. In the early years, I never questioned it. I was busy with my career, and she was living her dream. But as time passed, little things started to change. She became distant. Her phone, once left carelessly on the counter, was now always in her hand or face down. She started dressing up more often, wearing perfume even when she wasn't going anywhere special. She took private calls in the bathroom, and her laughter, once genuine and full of warmth, became forced, almost like she was living a different life when she was around me. But I ignored it. I told myself I was just being paranoid. One night, Rachel came home late from work again. It was nearly midnight, and I had been waiting up for her. She reeked of alcohol and perfume, her lipstick slightly smudged. "Rough night?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. She waved me off. Just some clients who wouldn't stop buying drinks. You know how it is." Except I didn't, because Rachel had always been careful about drinking during work events. Still, I let it go. But then I noticed something else. A small red mark on her collarbone, one that looked suspiciously like a love bite. "What's that?" I asked, pointing at it. Rachel glanced down, her face barely shifting before she responded, "Oh, this? Ugh." I scratched myself earlier. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. So I did. I let it slide. But the doubts had been planted, and they only grew from there. A few weeks later, I was working late when my friend Chris called me. "Hey man, I don't know if I should tell you this, but I just saw Rachel downtown with some guy. They were holding hands." My stomach dropped. "Are you sure?" "Positive." I wasn't going to say anything, but she looked pretty damn cozy with him. My hands tightened around my phone. "Thanks for telling me." I hung up and sat in my office, my mind spinning. I had two choices: ignore it, pretend it wasn't happening, or find out the truth. I chose the latter. The next night, Rachel claimed she had another late event. But instead of waiting at home, I followed her. She drove to a hotel. I parked outside, my heart pounding, my hands clammy with sweat. A few minutes later, a man approached her car, a tall, well-dressed guy I had never seen before. They kissed. I felt something inside me shatter. I wanted to storm in, confront her, demand answers. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I took out my phone and started recording. I needed proof. That night, when Rachel came home, I was waiting. "How was work?" I asked, my voice calm. She shrugged. "Exhausting." I took out my phone and pressed play. The video showed everything: the kiss, their laughter, the way they disappeared into the hotel together. Rachel's face turned pale. "Care to explain?" I asked. For a moment, she just stared at me. Then, in the most unexpected turn, she started crying. "You don't understand, Adam," she sobbed. "It's not what it looks like." I scoffed. "Not what it looks like? Are you serious?" She grabbed my hands, tears streaming down her face. "I was going to tell you. I swear. It was just a mistake. I love you." I pulled away. "A mistake? You've been lying to me for months, Rachel. Don't insult me." Her tears stopped almost immediately. And that's when I saw it, the cold calculation in her eyes. She wasn't sorry. She was just trying to control the damage. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice suddenly steady. "If you try to ruin my life over this, you'll regret it." I clenched my fists. "I think you already ruined your own life, Rachel." I walked out of the room, thinking that was the worst of it. I was wrong. Because Rachel wasn't just going to let me leave quietly. She was going to destroy me first. After that night, I decided I was done. I called a lawyer, started looking into divorce proceedings, and moved into the guest bedroom. I barely spoke to Rachel, and when I did, it was cold and distant. She tried a few times to talk to me, to convince me to work things out, but I refused. I wasn't going to stay with someone who had betrayed me so completely. But Rachel wasn't the type to accept consequences. 2 weeks later, I came home from work to find 2 police officers standing in my living room. "Mr. Adams?" one of them asked. I nodded, confused. "Yes." The second officer exchanged a glance with his partner before saying, "We need to talk. Your wife has filed a report against you for domestic abuse." For a moment, I thought I had misheard. I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Excuse me? She claims you've been physically and emotionally abusive toward her," the officer continued, his tone professional but firm. "She has injuries that match her statement, and she has filed for a restraining order." My blood ran cold. "Injuries?" I repeated. I have never laid a hand on Rachel in my life. The officers didn't care. One of them pulled out a piece of paper. "You need to leave the house immediately. Per the restraining order, you are not allowed within 500 feet of your wife." I was in shock. I looked toward Rachel, who was standing behind them, her face a perfect mask of fear and sadness. A dark bruise was visible on her arm. I felt sick. "She's lying," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "That bruise isn't for me." But it didn't matter. The law was on her side. I was forced to pack a bag and leave my own home that night. I spent the next few days in a cheap motel trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. I called my lawyer, but he told me that fighting a restraining order was difficult, especially when the alleged victim had visible injuries. "She's setting me up," I told him. "She's trying to get everything in the divorce." "It's possible," he admitted. "Unfortunately, courts tend to favor the wife in situations like these. We'll have to gather evidence and fight this strategically." In the meantime, my entire life was falling apart. Rachel had taken to social media, posting about how she was a survivor of domestic abuse. She painted herself as the poor, broken woman who had suffered at the hands of her cruel husband. And people believed her. Friends who had known me for years suddenly stopped answering my calls. My job put me on administrative leave, citing concerns about recent allegations. Even my own parents, who had always been my biggest supporters, were hesitant. "Adam," my mother said carefully over the phone, "Rachel is saying some serious things. Are you sure none of it is true?" That broke me. "Mom, I would never hurt a woman," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I want to believe you," she whispered. "I really do." I hung up the phone and put my head in my hands. Rachel had taken my home, my reputation,
my job.
And now, she was turning the people I loved against me. I had never felt more alone in my life. I knew I had 2 choices. I could sit back and let Rachel destroy me, or I could fight back. I chose the latter. I hired a private investigator, a man named Mark who had spent years uncovering fraud and deception. "Find out everything you can about Rachel," I told him. And I mean everything. A week later, he called me with results. "Adam, you're going to want to see this in person." We met in a small coffee shop, where he slid a folder across the table. I opened it, and my blood boiled. There were photos of Rachel meeting up with the man from the hotel. More than that, there were text messages, dozens of them. And then there was the kicker. Rachel visited a private clinic 2 days before she filed the restraining order, Mark said. She got a cosmetic procedure done. Specifically, she got bruising injections. I stared at him. "She what?" "She faked the injuries," he confirmed. "She paid to have bruises artificially created on her body." I clenched my fists.
She had planned this.
Every single bit of it. And now I had the proof. Armed with Mark's findings, I went back to my lawyer. "Let's take this to court," I said. My lawyer looked through the evidence and nodded. "We have a case, but we need to be smart about how we play this." Rachel thought she had won. She thought she had destroyed me. But she had underestimated just how far I was willing to go to clear my name. The court date was set, and I was ready to expose every single one of her lies. The day of the court hearing arrived, and I walked into the courtroom with my lawyer, my hands steady but my heart pounding. Rachel sat across from me, wearing a modest, light-colored dress, her face set in a look of false fragility. Her lawyer stood up first. "Your Honor," he began, "we are here today because my client, Rachel Adams, has suffered at the hands of her abusive husband. The evidence is clear. She has visible injuries consistent with physical assault. She has endured emotional and psychological torment for years. We are seeking a full protection order, as well as damages for emotional distress." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to remain calm. Rachel sniffled, playing her role perfectly. "Adam was never the man people thought he was," she said, her voice soft and trembling. He would get angry over the smallest things. And when he did, he would hurt me." She glanced at the judge with teary eyes. I was too scared to leave before, but I had to speak up before it got worse. My stomach churned with rage. The judge turned to my lawyer. "Mr. Taylor, your response?" My lawyer stood. "Your Honor, we have reason to believe that Mrs. Adams has been deceptive in her claims. We have substantial evidence proving that she has fabricated the abuse allegations." The courtroom shifted as whispers spread through the audience. The judge narrowed his eyes. "Go on." My lawyer walked to the center of the courtroom and held up a series of printed documents. "Your Honor, we have obtained medical records showing that Mrs. Adams visited a private cosmetic clinic 2 days before filing the restraining order. She received artificial bruising injections, procedures commonly used in the film and entertainment industry." Rachel stiffened. Her lawyer turned to her in confusion. "Furthermore," my lawyer continued, "we have text messages between Mrs. Adams and her lover, a man named Brian Carter, where they discuss using false abuse allegations to secure a favorable divorce settlement." He handed the documents to the judge, who scanned them carefully. Rachel's face drained of color. That's not true," she sputtered. "Your Honor," my lawyer pressed, "these messages were recovered from her personal device. We also have surveillance footage of her meeting Mr. Carter multiple times, including the night before she filed the report against my client." Rachel's hands were trembling now. "Mrs. Adams," the judge said, his tone sharp, "do you have an explanation for this?" She looked at her lawyer, but he was already rifling through the evidence, his face darkening. "Your Honor," my lawyer added, "this is not just a case of perjury. Mrs. Adams attempted to manipulate the court system, damage my client's reputation, and steal assets under false pretenses. We are requesting an immediate dismissal of all charges against Mr. Adams and the pursuit of legal action against Mrs. Adams for defamation and fraud." Rachel shot up from her seat.
No.
"This is a setup. Adam must have faked those messages." The judge slammed his gavel. "Sit down, Mrs. Adams." Rachel sat, shaking. I exhaled slowly. For the first time in weeks, I could see it the moment she realized she had lost. The judge turned to the bailiff. "Bring in Mr. Brian Carter for questioning." Rachel's eyes widened. "Wait, no, he's not involved in this." The doors opened, and Brian walked in, his face pale. "Mr. Carter," the judge asked, "do you deny the claims that you conspired with Mrs. Adams to fabricate abuse allegations?" Brian looked at Rachel, then at me. And then he cracked. "She told me it was the only way she could get full control of the house and money," he said quickly. She planned everything." Rachel let out a strangled gasp. "You son of a..." "That's enough," the judge snapped. Silence fell over the courtroom. After a long pause, the judge sighed. "Mr. Adams, I am dismissing all charges against you, effective immediately. The restraining order is null and void. Furthermore, I am referring this case for potential criminal investigation against Mrs. Adams for perjury, fraud, and obstruction of justice." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders. Rachel collapsed into her seat, her hands clutching the table. She had played her game, and she had lost. As soon as the judge made his ruling, the tension in the courtroom shifted. Murmurs spread as Rachel sat frozen, her face pale, her hands trembling. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering something urgently, but she barely reacted. The bailiff approached her. "Mrs. Adams, you are being detained for further questioning regarding potential perjury and fraud." Rachel snapped out of her daze. "What?
No.
This isn't fair." She turned to Brian. You spineless bastard. You promised." "Enough," the bailiff ordered, stepping between them. Rachel's lawyer sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Your Honor, I request a moment with my client." The judge nodded. "Make it quick." As Rachel was led to the side, my lawyer patted my shoulder. "Adam, we did it. She's finished." I exhaled, finally allowing myself to breathe. A reporter in the back of the courtroom rushed out, likely preparing to break the story. Rachel's attempt to destroy me had backfired spectacularly, and now she was the one facing criminal charges. Her lies had been exposed, and she had no way out. After the hearing, I walked out of the courthouse to find my sister, Emily, waiting. She rushed over and hugged me tightly. "Adam, it's over. You're free." I nodded.
Yeah.
"But it still feels unreal." She pulled back and gave me a serious look. "You need to focus on moving forward now. Don't let her steal any more of your life." She was right. The damage Rachel had done couldn't be undone overnight, but at least now, I had a chance to rebuild. Over the next few weeks, things started falling into place. Rachel's attempt to take everything from me had failed. The court had not only dismissed her claims but also froze her assets pending further investigation. She was no longer entitled to any spousal support, and because of the fraudulent claims, I was in the process of suing her for defamation. Meanwhile, her affair with Brian Carter had become public knowledge. His own girlfriend had found out and dumped him, and his reputation in our social circle was in shambles. Rachel, once a respected figure among her friends and colleagues, was now the subject of whispers and judgment. The job she had hoped to secure after divorcing me?
Gone.
No company wanted to be associated with someone who had been exposed as a liar and manipulator in court. Her world was falling apart. And I was finally free. One evening, about a month after the trial, I was packing up some boxes in my apartment when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered.
Adam.
My stomach twisted at the sound of her voice. "Rachel. Please don't hang up." Her voice was hoarse, almost pleading. I just need to talk." I stayed silent. "I messed up, okay?" she admitted, her voice shaking. "I shouldn't have done what I did. I was scared. I thought I would lose everything if I didn't fight back." I laughed coldly. "And instead, you lost everything because you did fight back." A choked sob came through the phone. "I don't know what to do, Adam. Everyone hates me. I lost my job, my friends. I can't even go outside without people looking at me like I'm some kind of monster." "Maybe," I said, "because that's exactly what you are." She gasped, but I didn't care. "You tried to destroy my life, Rachel." I continued, my voice steady. "You lied about abuse. You wanted to ruin me just so you could get money and sympathy. And now that you're suffering the consequences, you want pity?" Silence. "Then, I just want things to go back to the way they were." I exhaled, shaking my head. "They never will." And with that, I hung up. Rachel Adams was nothing to me now. After that last phone call, I never heard from Rachel again. At first, I expected her to try reaching out again. Maybe another attempt to manipulate me, maybe a desperate plea, but nothing. Instead, I heard about her from others. Word spread fast. Rachel had lost nearly everything. With no job and no financial support, she was struggling to maintain her lifestyle. The expensive apartment she had moved into after filing for divorce? She had to vacate it when she couldn't keep up with the rent. She tried staying with friends, but most of them had distanced themselves from her after the truth came out. Eventually, she had no choice but to move back in with her parents, a humiliating step for someone as proud and image-obsessed as she was. Brian Carter?
Gone.
After his girlfriend dumped him, he tried salvaging his career, but the scandal had done too much damage. His reputation in his industry was ruined, and last I heard, he was struggling to find stable work. He and Rachel didn't even stay together. I had to admit, there was some satisfaction in knowing that the people who tried to ruin me had destroyed themselves instead. As for me, things were looking up. Winning the case gave me a fresh start. The lawsuit I had filed against Rachel for defamation was still ongoing, but with the courts ruling in my favor, I had strong grounds for a hefty settlement. But more than money, I had my life back. For the first time in years, I was free from Rachel's manipulation, from the toxicity of our broken marriage. I reconnected with old friends, the ones Rachel had tried to isolate me from. I started focusing on my career again, finally able to work without the stress of a looming divorce battle. I even started dating again. It was slow at first. Trusting someone new after what I had been through wasn't easy. But one evening, Emily convinced me to join her and a few friends for dinner, and that's where I met Samantha. She was different.
Kind.
Thoughtful.
Genuine.
The opposite of Rachel in every way. We started talking, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something I had forgotten was possible: happiness. One evening, a year after the trial, I was walking through a local park when I saw her. Rachel. She was sitting alone on a bench, staring at nothing, a cigarette dangling between her fingers. She looked different. The polished, confident woman I once knew was gone. Her once perfect hair was dull and unkempt. The designer clothes she had once obsessed over were gone, replaced by something simple and worn. She looked tired. She noticed me before I could walk away.
Adam.
I sighed. Rachel. For a moment, she just looked at me, then laughed bitterly. You look good. I didn't respond. She took a deep breath. I guess you heard how things turned out for me. I nodded. Lost my job, my savings, my friends. She exhaled. I made a lot of mistakes. I folded my arms. You tried to ruin my life. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, there was no arrogance, no manipulation, just regret. I know, she admitted, and I paid the price. Silence stretched between us. Finally, she looked down at her hands. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I studied her, searching for any sign of deception, any sign of the woman who had once tried to destroy me. But she was gone. I nodded. Goodbye, Rachel. And then I walked away. As I left the park, I felt something shift inside me. For years, I had carried the weight of what she had done to me, the betrayal, the lies, the pain. But not anymore. Rachel was nothing more than a chapter in my past. And I was finally ready to write a new story.